Since 2015, Pop Health Podcast has brought to you some of the best minds in healthcare, including leaders from government, not-for-profit, and investor-backed powerhouses, as they share successes, failures, and how our audience can move forward in today's constantly evolving healthcare world. Thank you for joining us for today's episode presented by 24 Hour Home Care.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Pop Health Podcast. I'm Gavin Ward, host of Pop Health Podcast. Today's episode, I had the privilege of sitting down with Raine Arndt-Couch, who is the former social work leader at Blue Shield Promise, a large managed care provider here in California, and now has recently started her own consulting firm, which has similar initials to her name, and that consulting firm name is Responsive Advocacy and Consulting. In today's episode, we learn of Raine's journey, including how she grew up in Hawaii and was actually the first runner-up of the Miss Hawaii pageant a few years back, and how she met her husband while doing law school before she got her law degree, and then how she moved to California, the East Coast, and back as she followed her husband in his military journey, while focusing her career on social work. We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and Raine will share a little bit about how she helped build a team at Blue Shield Promise in California, including around the California Advancing and Innovating Medi-Cal Initiative, and how she's now transitioning into leading her own consulting firm. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Feel free to check out other episodes of Pop Health Podcast by visiting us at pophealthpodcast.com, checking us out on our YouTube channel, or visiting us wherever you listen to your episodes. Thanks so much. Take care. Raine, thanks so much for joining the show today.
Yes, thanks so much for having me.
You're very welcome. So, Raine, we've known each other probably like 3 years now, and it's been really cool to see you at Blue Shield. Blue Shield Promise is what I like to say, as a leader there, and now going off and doing your own thing. So, I look forward to hearing a little bit about that journey, and I'm sure our audience is going to like to hear it as well. But before we do that, we like to get to know our guests a little bit outside of like the career place, ideally, maybe a fun fact, hobby, something like that about you.
Absolutely. Well, true to form as a social worker, I'm like, okay, what do I want to share about myself? But I think one thing that folks often don't know about me, I guess a fun fact, is that in my early 20s, I actually was first runner-up for Miss Hawaii in 2007. So I'm dating myself there, but it was actually in the last part of my grad school journey. And so that's just kind of a fun fact, because I didn't grow up as a pageant girl. I think if anything, I would have leaned towards the tomboy side. And so it was something really outside my comfort zone, and something I don't talk about a lot, but when I share that with people, it's always kind of a fun, conversation starter, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely. I had no idea. I knew there was a Hawaii connection, but wow, the beauty pageant. So was that was that something that, like, when you did the pageant and you're up there on stage, were the nerves just like going crazy? Did you feel comfortable? Like, curious what was going through your mind while you're up there, trying to look all beautiful in front of strangers?
Yeah, you'd think you'd be a lot more nervous. I guess there was a lot of preparation that went into it. And so I can say truthfully, on the night of the competition, I felt so comfortable and at peace. It was like it's one of those moments where like the audience sort of disappears and you're just sort of like the culmination of all of your work. And actually it was funny. I was going through some old stuff and I came across some of my Miss Hawaii documents. And one of the documents, you have to provide like a resume and your platform. So you actually run on a platform. And it was so interesting because my platform at the time was Healthy Children, Healthy Nation, Health Promotion, Education for All. And so to look at that now 20 years ago, and to see that it still had, like, my passion was there at such an early part in my budding social work career. And so kind of a fun fact that also ties into, I think, a little bit about what we'll talk about today. But that was actually something I just stumbled upon last week. And so that was kind of cool to see that. And I think that was part of why I felt so comfortable. It was really sort of a stretch activity that I did that I really, really grew from. And it was something just really fun that I was able to do and learn a lot from it.
Okay, awesome. So was Hawaii, I think that's where you grew up. Is that accurate?
Yep,
okay.
Born and raised.
Okay, so tell us about, so I'm going to Hawaii in the summer as like a vacation.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of, especially folks who live in California or the West Coast, like Hawaii is a very popular spot, right, for tourists.
Right.
Obviously, living there is probably a lot different than vacationing there. Is there anything you could share about maybe a myth of Hawaii or a misconception? Like when people say, I would love to live in Hawaii, but they've only vacation there. Any like tips or wisdom on that regard?
Well, gosh, I mean, I think we could get real heavy there real quick in terms of, housing and the prevalence of homelessness and just the cost of living in general. So I think just from a very practical sense, I don't think a lot of people realize. I mean, they may realize that going on vacation might burn a hole in your pocket, but to actually live there is something different entirely. And I think especially Southern Californians maybe think that it's not all that different, but if you, even between in areas like Southern California or maybe even San Francisco, I would say the cost of living is one of the biggest difficulties that local families have to deal with.
Yeah.
But then I think on the flip side of that, what's so unique, and I don't know that everyone always gets to experience it as a tourist, is really the deep culture, right? That you get to a degree, even in the touristy spots. I think that, no shade at all to the tourist industry. I have lots of family and friends that work in the industry and have done, a tremendous job over decades to really provide authentic experiences. Unless you really sort of embed yourself and are living there, you kind of miss out, I think, on those rich cultural traditions of, respect, caring for one another. I mean, they seem really cliche, but it's being someone that was born and raised there, and I am part Native Hawaiian as well. It's really important for folks. And that's something that maybe is not shocking or surprising, but what I would love everyone to be able to experience fully instead of just sort of the touristy, glimpse into Hawaii life. And again, I think shaped a lot of who I am as a social worker as well, because it's like ingrained in you very early on as children, right? That you take care of each other, that you take care of your elders, right? Not that Hawaiians are the only culture that do that, but it is a special, special place in terms of how we view folks, community really as family, and that shared responsibility.
Yeah. And you mentioned how like that helped shape you at an early age. So you grew up in Hawaii, and at what point were you thinking, well, I don't know, you mentioned like grad school. Did you study like sociology or go to school for that field?
Yes. So actually, I went away for undergrad. So I went to school in Spokane, Washington, Whitworth College at the time, now university. So small liberal arts school. And there I studied psychology and sociology. They didn't have a social work program there. And I'll be honest, I didn't even know that was really something like social work was a degree, right, that you could attain, but was introduced in my senior year to this idea of like being a professional social worker and the master's program. And so that really planted the seed for me. I went straight into my master's program, but went back home to Hawaii for that. And spent 2 years, learning and doing practical experience in the field. And that's really, so I have that educational background, but it was really the practical experience. And, that really allowed me to find my niche, right? Social work, what drew me to social work was how versatile the degree was, because you hear all these horror stories, right? About, okay, you're going to go into social work, you're not going to make a lot of money, which is a myth, but also that you're going to burn out really, really quickly, right? And so I kind of knew those potential barriers, if you will, going into it. But what I loved was with social work, you can shift, right? You can work with a different population. You can work in a different industry. You can create your own path. And so that was what really drew me to social work.
Awesome. So you finished your grad program in Hawaii, and then I know you ultimately made it out to San Diego. Tell us about that transition and that inspiration to move to San Diego.
Yeah, well, I spent, Well, several years working in Hawaii, mostly in healthcare. And I call it like an incubator of sorts when I worked in the inpatient arena. So got a lot of really rich experience there and a lot of freedom really to kind of explore different areas. But about halfway, I was in the inpatient setting for about 5 years. And about halfway through, I was like, I want to go back to school, but I don't know what I want to do. And I had a colleague at the time who really encouraged me to consider law. And what a lot of what we were being exposed to in the hospital setting were things like, grappling with end of life decisions, right? Is there documentation? Social workers were called upon to help figure out, is there a decision maker? Do we have legal documentation that shows us what we should do, right? How we should care for individuals that maybe no longer have the ability to tell us, right, what they want or what their wishes are. And so I thought, maybe that is an area that I want to learn more about or make an impact sort of at a different level. And so just about that time, the University of Hawaii had been launching, I think I was part of the 4th cohort of evening part-time JD program.
Okay.
So that made it possible because I worked full-time and then went to school. And I'm sorry, this is a long way of saying that's where I met my now husband in law school. And he was an active duty military member. And so that's really ultimately what shifted us over to California, which is where I've spent the large part of the last decade or so, but also a little stint in the East Coast in Maryland. But that's really what took me or brought me, I should say, here to California.
Okay, awesome. Well, a great place to meet a spouse is, working late in the night at school. So, and thank you for his service.
That shared grind, I guess you can say.
Yes. I have a lot of family in the military, or at least my dad, my brothers, they've all served. They're not active. My nephew as well. So I always love running into folks. And I know he's served many decades there. And San Diego is definitely a great, big place for America's military folks. So you worked in the inpatient setting. You worked in the hospital system, from what I recall, in San Diego as well. And then tell me about the shift where you ended up working for Blue Shield Promise, which serves on the Medi-Cal side in both San Diego and LA counties.
Yeah, that shift to payer was definitely something new for me. I'd worked, as you mentioned, inpatient settings, medical group settings, so doing, outpatient social work and case management, telephonic, right, which actually allowed me to do that work even from the East Coast. And so there were a lot of opportunities, even as a military spouse, to kind of maintain my career trajectory. But it was when we came back to San Diego from Maryland that an old colleague of mine actually reached out. She was working at Blue Shield Promise, and she said, "Hey, social work team there is looking for a leader, and I think you would, be great at it." And so really that was what piqued my interest. At that point in time, I was actually in my doctorate studies, getting my doctorate in social work.
Yes.
And that's a very practice-based degree. And so a lot of it was around leadership, right? And social impact. And so it just was really good timing that the opportunity arose at Blue Shield Promise. And it was something that I knew by then. I mean, a lot of my career had been shaped by how to integrate, right, social care into the delivery of health care. And so it just, again, was this intersection of what I wanted to do, an opportunity to sort of spread my wings as a formalized leader. Yeah. I will say that those opportunities for social workers in healthcare are actually still very few and far between. And so, it worked out really well for me. That opportunity arose. And so that's where I shifted into the payer space.
Yes.
And I know we're going to talk a lot about it probably here shortly, but, right in basically the first year of the CalAIM pilot as well. So that was the timing of that.
Yes. Yeah. And that's where I got connected with Raine. My day job is in home care, as many of you know. This podcast is not to talk about my day job. It's to talk about Raine. But that's where we got connected. And I remember you stepping in, Blue Shield Promise, as I mentioned earlier. serves San Diego and LA County Medi-Cal residents, and Blue Shield as an entity, as you all know, is a large commercial / Medicaid. I'm probably not saying it correctly, Raine.
All lines of business.
Yeah, all lines of business. So yeah, I got a chance to connect with Raine when we were kind of mid, I think like contract phase or whatever it was. It was towards the beginning. And so what was it like going into this gigantic initiative in California called the California Advancing Innovating Medi-Cal, or CalAIM, and being a new leader? Was this your first like official leadership role?
So I had been a lead, but this was a senior manager position. So definitely the biggest leadership role, formalized leadership role I'd ever taken on. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you're not only just leading a social work team, which isn't a job in and of itself, but you're also kind of sort of building this new program with different community supports and enhanced care management, lots of other stuff. So tell us about that journey.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that that's what really excited me about the role, but that should have been maybe a little bit of a flag that I should have paused. I say that jokingly in the sense that the opportunity made me very excited to sort of get in on ground level. And I think that is where so much of the past, almost 4 years has just been spent really flexing muscles, right, that you didn't know you had or that you had to grow. Because to your point, it was not just, okay, how do I lead a social work team or how do I create programs from a social work lens, but how do you integrate contracting and claims and all the administrative things, right? Data exchange, all these things that, yes, I knew about peripherally, but because CalAIM was so new, so innovative, yes, it was built within a medical model, but really didn't fit the mold, right, of anything that health plans and, frankly, community-based organizations were really set up, right? Like there wasn't a playbook. I mean, that's the bottom line. And so very exciting in that degree. And so I took it, hit the ground running. And in fact, within the first couple of months, so the role was bifurcated between, as you mentioned, these CalAIM programs, but also leading, the plan's social service delivery teams. So direct practice social workers, community health advocates. And at the time, split between San Diego and LA. So I was really focused in the San Diego market at that time. The LA position actually opened up, and I had learned enough to know that to do it well, we really had to kind of stop spreading the work too much across both of those really large service lines. And so I was able to focus exclusively on the CalAIM, delivery, so to speak, and all of the program management of that as a senior manager when we brought on our second senior manager to handle more of the, the direct practice programmatic aspects. What was funny is, not shortly after that, I was actually fortunately promoted to the director role, which then, oversaw all of it all over again. But it really, I think it just gives an example of how we all still today, I think anyone doing this work has to remain agile, but also really creative and really think about, okay, with the limited resources that we know everyone is strapped with, and sometimes limited information, you have, a policy guide that might be hundreds of pages, but again, it's not a playbook, right? No one's going to tell you step by step how to do something. And you're going to make decisions that maybe you have to change, right? I mean, you're going to make mistakes. And I think that concept of failing fast is really important. And that's what I really learned, right? And for someone who tends to be pretty type A, I think that was where I was able to stretch around. Yes, you set into motion plans or you have ideas about how to, implement certain aspects of programs, but you have to remain agile, not only because regulations change very frequently, but also like it doesn't always make sense, right? It doesn't always work the way you think it's going to work. And so that's what I really learned through CalAIM, along with balancing and being really excited about, as I mentioned, I was so passionate about the opportunity to finally, on a really large scale, be able to say, hey, social care is vital, right, to population health for particularly our Medi-Cal members. And I would argue not just Medi-Cal recipients or beneficiaries, but it really gave that opportunity, again, at the ground level to build something that I am really passionate about, which is that intersection, again, of social care and healthcare delivery.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So looking back, you were there for many years. Looking back, what's an accomplishment you're proud of, or a story that you can share that makes you really fond of your time there?
Yeah, and I think that it's a little bit kind of expounding on what I just mentioned about we're all doing what we think is best, right, with the information and the resources that we have. But I learned, again, very early on, and the power of relationship building. And I know that that's such a social work response to your question, but when I look back, the wins really are around relationships, and not just relationships to build relationships, but that recognition that to do all of this well, right? For it to count for anything, we have to be collaborative in nature. We have to sort of put I don't even know if it's egos aside, but just sort of your own maybe blinders of what might be important to you in a very short period of time, expand that, right? To think about sustainability and how all of the players really have to fall into place and align as much as possible. Of course, you never get 100% alignment, but the power of relationships in that process I can't even express it fully. But what I mean by that is, again, there are going to be missteps. But if you have built that relationship and you know that everyone's moving with intention, the grace is there, right? We're going to work through this together, right? Yes. It's that assumption of, like I said, positive intent versus, oh, you're trying to make my life so hard, right? Yeah. Or something. So I think that that's really an obvious win. I mean, of course, we were able to execute on programs. We were able to deliver care to individuals. And that is, I should have led with that. Of course, that's like the utmost importance of what came out of that. But I think only because of intentional relationship building.
Yeah, you said grace, which I thought was really cool. That's a word that I don't think I hear enough of. I read a book in college called What's So Amazing About Grace. And I'm really glad you used that word. And as a leader, I think that's really important because you mentioned like good intent, right? The relationship. So that's really good. So
and learning to give that to yourself too. I think that was a hard lesson to learn. It's easy to encourage others to give themselves grace or to extend grace to others, but sometimes we're like our own worst critic. And when we know that there's so much work to be done, there's so many, complexities to the work that sometimes you can feel sort of overwhelmed with, gosh, am I even doing anything well? So being able to extend that grace to yourself or have others in your corner, like I said, with those relationships, reminding you like, this is where we started. This is where we are. Yes. Do we have more to work on? Absolutely. But yeah, I love that term grace because I think it goes in so many directions, and at different times, depending on what the needs are.
Yeah. So, you built this program, you built great relationships, you lead a social work team, you lead the CalAIM initiative, and then you decide after a few years, all right, time for something else. Tell us about what was going through your mind when you decided to, and I don't know if it was take a break and not sure what's next, or if you always had a plan of, let me just jump into creating my own consulting, group or firm. Tell us about that journey.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you kind of called that out because I will say with full transparency and honesty, it was I need a break.
Okay.
And I didn't know what was next. But I had the support of, again, I'm going to shout out my husband here, and others, of course, but to just, this work can be really heavy. Yeah. And I think that we don't see enough maybe of people recognizing that and the impacts that it has on not only a personal level, because I think we can talk about burnout, right? We can talk about all of that, and that's very real. And again, I'm very transparent about I was at that point, right?
Yeah.
But also professionally, and thinking about those are signs, right? That maybe there's just a different path forward. And it was, I guess, threefold, because I just said two things, right? Like taking care of yourself on a personal level, and being, again, someone that is like 110% all day, every day. It was less about the environment. I mean, of course, the environment, it's a highly regulated environment. There's always more to do. So yes, that played a factor, but it was also coming to the realization that my approach to the work was burning me out, right? And being able to say, I need rest so that I can come back with greater clarity, right? That I can come back. And again, this is something that as a social worker, we preach all the time to, family caregivers. You have to take care of yourself in order to take care of others. But when you're in the daily grind of things, it sometimes can be elusive, I guess I will say. So anyway, sorry, it's a long way of saying lots of reasons went into it. I didn't exactly know what I was going to do. But that became, pretty clear pretty quickly. It's something, I've always sort of thrown out there, like I would love to get into consulting, because I do think that my background, I have just like a intersection of so many things, right? Whether it's, again, direct service delivery as a social worker, as a case manager, but also as a behavioral health clinician, right? As someone that, with my legal background, while I've never practiced law, actually intentionally went to law school really to understand how do I magnify my impact as a social worker. So kind of understanding systems from a different perspective, health policy, right? I mean, there's just like so many things that I'm really excited about being able to think differently about how that work can be done, and how I can work with all of those partners that I talked about when I got to see sort of firsthand both health plans and the challenges, but also the wins there, but also the providers, right, on the ground level, like you all and many, many others who are taking on this work. And it's not easy, because it's learning almost a whole new language and way of doing things in order to make this big, bright behemoth of a system work. But yeah, so I took some time off, became pretty clear, like it was just one of those opportunities to bet on myself, and had the encouragement of a lot of folks. So this is where we are today.
All right. So looking at the name of your organization, Responsive Advocacy and Consulting, strange coincidence that where am I going? And Raine and I have not talked about this, but she probably knows where I'm going, right? Mm-hmm. Tell us about the name of your organization and why it's a coincidence with maybe your name.
Yeah. So it is kind of a play on words. So we'll talk a little bit about, obviously, the importance of the words themselves, but with my initials. So Raine, Arndt-Couch, and Responsive Advocacy and Consulting. So that RAC or RAC. I love to kind of a good word play, I guess you can say. But yeah, responsive advocacy, and consulting. I mean, the consulting part, obviously pretty clear, but, again, having time to think about my experience and what I was seeing and what I still see, right, in the industry is we have just tremendous pressure, as I mentioned, to do things by certain dates, to meet certain regulations, but we're not always afforded that moment to pause and think, okay, why are we doing this at all, right? Whose needs are we trying to meet? And so that responsive piece, right, is keep the humanness in the work, right? We're being responsive, not because we have to, right? The moment you think you have to do something because someone put it in a policy or a procedure, and you don't know why, or you don't have that understanding of how, in order to be, again, responsive for the people that you're creating systems for, then that's the crossroads. That's when I come in, right? And so that's what this organization or my business is really built around. bringing that humanness back into systems in a way that, again, advocates, right? So the advocacy piece, but not just for beneficiaries, right? The folks that you're building programs for, which of course is always first and foremost, but also the users, or sort of the people doing the work, right? Making it make sense so that all of those things, again, come into at least some semblance of alignment, and that it doesn't feel like we're just doing things to do them, checking things off the box. And I say that, again, with no disrespect or thought that like people go to work thinking, I want to just check things off the box. Like, no one does that. But over time, sometimes the way that we build our systems, it can start to feel that way.
No doubt.
So,
yeah. Checking the box. Yeah. I've heard my own social circles. And there's times in my life where sometimes we do things like, well, just got to do this. So I'll admit it, in my 20 plus careers, like, it's a real thing. So did you go into, I know you took a break and it was sincere, right? Yep. And forgive me, I know you as more like an acquaintance, like we're not, I don't know you, we're not super close or anything like that. So forgive me if I challenge you a little bit with saying we're telling the truth with that break,
Oh yeah.
So thank you for saying, it was a real break. So does this mean you were kind of starting from scratch, or did you have some folks who were telling you, hey, if you ever start consulting, let us know. We could probably use your help. Tell us, like, are you truly like from scratch, or do you have a network that's already leaning on you?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I think, and I'm learning very quickly, again, that power of connectedness and the network. So the network's definitely there. I think the next piece is getting my vision and my message out and clear, not only for those that I'm hoping to work with and to serve, but also for myself, right? And so taking that time for that clarity. And I think I'm there to a degree, but part of what so yes, the network's there, but I think the work in and of itself, my hope or desire is that folks don't feel, again, like there's boxes of things I can do or can't do. Obviously, I'm not going to do something that I have no experience or expertise in, but there's something about the freedom of being able to really rely heavily on my social work skills of assessment, right? And going in, whether it's organizations or people, right? People's lives, like in the independent case management aspect of my firm, right, is really going in, like, what are your biggest challenges, right? Let's think through that. Let's take a pause and actually ask the hard questions so that we can get people out of the swirl, right? We need to get to a place where then we can make some really targeted, I don't want to use the term intervention in that sense, but kind of, right? Yeah. Like, what are the solutions? What are the things that that I would recommend doing, or that I can do in collaboration with you to get you to the place where you're hitting your outcomes, right? That you have sustainable solutions to really complex problems that organizations and people are grappling with.
Okay, cool. So while the work is coming, right, for this, you're also, I see here on LinkedIn at least, Case Management Society of America. You're the incoming president. I didn't take a screenshot. I just wrote a note here. Is it incoming, or are you the active leader? Tell us about that. President-elect
for the Southern California chapter. So that will be my first, real intentional foray into the local level of CMSA. I've spent some time on the national board and am a committee chair. And so really loving the idea of, again, building roots in community. And that the folks at the chapter, just shout out to them of the commitment over the years to really cultivate that, again, that homegrown feeling, right, of network, knowledge base. I mean, it's just so amazing. So yeah, that's sort of one of the next big moves, sort of on the professional front as well.
Awesome. And forgive me for not knowing the upcoming event, but I did see you're speaking as well at and there may be multiple, but there was one on LinkedIn. You might know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So ABCOR, which is like utilization management physician group. So that's in September. Also presenting at the CMSA, or Case Management Society of America's conference in June. So it's staying active, in the community. And that's something that close to a decade now. I think one of my first, my first podium presentations was in 2016. So just coming up on 10 years of that, really started to shape kind of how I maybe navigate that professional environment. And so I've always kept things going even outside of your day job, right? And I think knowing that you do the podcast, and I'm sure other things you probably can understand that, of just sort of diversifying what I'm doing, staying connected to the latest and greatest. And I just love to learn, and I love to teach and share, and really work towards those. Again, it sounds really cliche, but it's true. Like it really excites me and brings a lot of energy to my work when I'm able to see other people doing really great things and being able to sort of feed off of each other as well.
Awesome, Raine. So if folks are interested in possibly leveraging your expertise, how do they reach out to you? Do you have a website? Do you have tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's, two distinct service lines. One really is the healthcare consulting piece around, processes, audit readiness, clinical, insights as a social worker, bringing that to the table, as well as then the independent case management services. But yes, I have a full website. There's ways to set up, a call with me, send me a message. I'm also on LinkedIn, have a business page there. So not sure if you want me to.
Yes, please.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. So the website is RAC. That's, again, stands for Responsive Advocacy and Consulting. So rac.consulting. So it's not a .com. So it's a consulting. So rac.consulting. And that'll bring you to, all the info that you need. But I think, again, for me, I try to pack in as much information on there and kind of give folks my vision and obviously explain a little more about my expertise and my interests. But at the end of the day, I just want to be able to understand how people are navigating, again, those intersections of social care and healthcare and the complexities. We know that things aren't getting easier for folks, right? And so I would love to talk and really think about how I can bring value add to organizations or individuals and their families.
Awesome, Raine. Well, hey, thank you for sharing your journey today. We heard about your fun fact, which was really cool during your days in grad school, and being a first runner-up for the Miss, did I say Miss Hawaii pageant? Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, Miss Hawaii Scholar.
Sometimes I say Mrs., but no, I think it's Miss Hawaii pageant.
MISS.
Yes. You've been all the way from Hawaii to Maryland and California in between, and just learning about your skills and things like that our audience hopefully can lean on in the future. But we really appreciate you joining today's episode. I did have one last question. Your name, Raine, you're from Hawaii.
Yes.
Where is the name from? You might be the first Raine I know.
Yeah, it's not very common. I actually have an older sister named Sky. That's Skye. So kind of went along with her name. And so when you hear that, my brother's name is also Free, Free, and he's the oldest. So you can start to see where this is also headed. It's like, was that the 70s? I was born in the early 80s. So my parents were a product of the 70s. The story goes a little deeper than that, but they, the question I often get are, were your parents hippies? But so not a huge story there. But, in Hawaii, names are, like most cultures, but, pretty significant. And so we have a lot of middle names as well. So I didn't make my business name align with all my initials, because that would have been 5.
Wow.
But yeah, so I probably should have, maybe that's an obvious fun fact around my name, but yeah, so that's kind of the impetus to that. Whether I was a boy or a girl, my parents had settled on Raine for me. But prior to that, they had dibs on if it was a boy, my dad could name the child. If it was a girl, my mom could name the child. But by the time I came around as the third, they were pretty much in agreement.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that second fun fact here at the end with the group. Thanks again, Raine, for joining today's episode. And folks, again, if you want to reach out to Raine, her website is rac.consulting, which is the first .consulting I've ever heard of. It's cool that like technology allows that kind of website nowadays, and it stands for Responsive Advocacy and Consulting. Thanks so much, Raine, again for joining the show.
Thank you so much, Gavin. Such a pleasure. Bye.
Thanks everyone for tuning in to another episode of Pop Health Podcast. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and if you have and want to check out other episodes, visit us at pophealthpodcast.com, iTunes or Apple Music, Spotify, Stitcher, and now YouTube as well. Take care.